following is a local resident producers program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Oshkosh Diaries. I'm Paul Esslinger, joined by co-host Derek Kleiber. Tonight we have a gentleman who's been a lifelong resident of the city of Oshkosh. I've known him for several years, and Derek and I are both members of the Oshkosh Memorabilia Club, and this gentleman is also. And he's been a community member for many years and has done a lot of work for the city of Oshkosh. He was a city council member in years past and has a list of things that we'll get into. So without any further ado, I'm very happy to say Larry Spanbauer is here to join us tonight and talk about the life and times of Larry Spanbauer.
Well, good evening.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for inviting me.
All right. Well, first of all, Larry, I know I can ask a guy this. I don't have to worry. With a girl, you have to be cautious. But how old are you? How long have you been in Oshkosh?
I was born in 1942, so you can do the math. I'm over the 70 mark.
Okay.
So the next big one is 80. And have lived here all my life.
What part of the city did you grow up?
Grew up on the south side, just west of Knapp Street on 10th Street, 10th and Weisbrod. When I was going to West Oshkosh High School, there was a 2-mile limit that you could get busing, and the 2-mile mark was through our backyard. So I got to walk, and people down the block got to ride. So
Well, we can't all be
got to play by the rules.
right. Exactly.
Tell us a little bit about your parents, Larry, how you were raised, siblings.
Like I say, I was born in 1942. Same year my parents bought the house on the corner of 10th and Weisbrod.
Okay.
And my father worked at Morgan's when I was born, and then went on the Oshkosh Fire Force in 1947. So I have a great fondness for the fire department, and we'll get into that more. But there's another reason for it too. But I grew up in a fire family, you can say. My father was one of the premier ball players in the city. He started playing both hardball and softball back in the 30s, and I've compiled a scrapbook on him. Played with a lot of teams. Played semi-pro ball for the Oshkosh team. At the same time, he was also playing for a Fond du Lac team.
Really?
And so I have a newspaper article where the two teams played each other, and it was a matter of which team he was going to pitch for and play for at that time. Baseball was such a big thing in the 40s that it wasn't uncommon for them to have 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people attend a baseball game. They had tryouts for the teams and anyone else. So he worked when the fire department was working 24 on, 24 off, and so he had to work his schedule, his baseball schedule around that too. And so there were times where he didn't get to play; he had to tend to work. So
were those pro or semi-pro?
it was semi-pro teams. Yep. If memory serves me right, I think he got paid $7 a game for being a pitcher. And he was also a big stick. In 1940 for the Wisconsin's Central League, he was the batting champion, and I have his trophy at home. So he batted 406 or something for the season.
Wow.
And so was supposed to have a tryout for the Cubs. Good friend team of yours. That was in 1942, and the story is that he was set to go to Texas, play in the minor leagues in Texas, and my mother said, with one child home and one on the way, we're not going to Texas.
Yeah.
So that was the end of his semi-pro, and the money wasn't there at that time either, and you're in the middle of the Second World War, and they were looking for players, and working at Morgan's at that time, he was exempt from the service, working wartime industry. So there were a lot of things that played into it, but he continued to play through those war years.
A little bit more on the baseball, Larry. I know baseball was very, very popular, back in the 40s. How many different teams were they played against, and how far did they travel? Where did they have to go?
That's so interesting because cars weren't what they are today, and we didn't have a car until 1953. So it was always Doc Haynes, a dentist in town, would pick up some of the team members, and some of the other coaches would have cars, and they'd pick up team members. But there was a league that went over to Rush Lake and to Omro and to Waukau. They all had hardball teams and had very good hardball teams. And so that was only one of the teams, but there were dozens of teams, and you tried out to get onto them. It isn't that you just had a bunch of buddies and said, we're going to have a baseball team. It was, there were sponsors, and the mayor came out and threw out the first pitch. And when they played Berlin, the mayor from Berlin came, and they have a band walking down the street and out to the athletic field. And the big field then was, one of the main fields was on the corner of Irving and Hazel Street, where the old Naval Reserve was. And I remember the stories from that too. My dad was left-handed, and he could put him into the lake.
Really?
So when he played with the fire department, they made him switch to being a right-handed batter. So
No
they
kidding.
used to play, the Oshkosh Fire Department would play the police department, and it was every year the Oshkosh Fire Department would play the Appleton Fire Department at the Fugelberg Park. And as a kid, you'd go out there and you could have all the pop you could drink. And so, but there too, they made him bat right-handed.
Okay.
Was competition pretty fierce? You mentioned these tryouts. I mean, when there were these tryouts, did they draw from a large area for these tryouts, and were they pretty intense?
Oh, they were very
competitive?
intense, yeah. And so if you didn't make one team, there was another team waiting to pick them up.
Scoop you
And, my dad played for the outdoor equipment company, and there were always also the Oshkosh Merchants, and gentlemen like Hugh Mugrauer was a catcher for that group of people. So there were really two big entities in town, and after the war, and Hoop went off the war and came back and played again, and it seems like they all ended up on the fire department. So really, the Oshkosh Fire Department in the late 40s and early 50s had a real good baseball team.
Right. I know that your mother and father are no longer with us. When did they pass away, Larry, and what impact did that have on your life?
Well, my dad passed away in 1959. I was a junior in high school, and of course that had an impact on us. Like I say, being a fireman, he worked 24 on, 24 off, and on his off days, he would pick up milk for City View Dairy on 10th Street, which was just 3 doors from our house. And so I'd go and ride with him, go out to half dozen farmers and pick up a milk can full of milk, or maybe 2, and make the swing, and then about 10 o'clock we'd be done, and the morning he was going to make a run and deliver orange drink and soda to a couple of the taverns. And I said, you want me to go along? He said, no, go find the guys and go play. Well, he walked into the back of the Triangle Tavern to deliver things, George Jasinski's tavern, and they heard him fall, died of a heart attack. They say he never knew what hit him when he hit the ground.
Yeah.
And so I got a phone call, and so that was the start of it.
So how much later then did your mother pass away?
My mother just passed away a number of years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
So then Mom, back in 1953, had a family without a husband, and that had to have been an unbelievably hard time.
Right, and there were 3 of us. I was 16, my older sister was 19, a younger sister was 12. And so there were 3 of us in the family, and she had never worked. So she had to go and get a job, and she worked at Shillebrit for a while, and then worked at Miller Potter's on Oregon Street. So she did a remarkable job raising us 3 kids and having money and getting us through our schooling. And younger sister got her down to Fond du Lac through nursing school, and so she did a very remarkable job for the means at the time. But at that time you were poor, but you didn't know you were poor because everybody was in the same boat. We were all in the same boat.
So you had 2 sisters. Did you beat them up regularly, or
No,
how did that work?
They took care of me pretty good. So
Did they?
the middle child
Okay.
wasn't a bad place to be.
All right. Derek, go ahead.
Well, speaking of schools, what schools did you attend growing up in?
Well, we went to Sacred Heart School, Catholic, Southside Catholic. And, so it was only a little walk, 5 blocks, living on 10th Street, go to 5th Street. Was an altar boy, and nunzoys were rough on me, maybe a little bit rougher, because we had, when we got to the later years, 7th, 8th grade, 9th grade, we would have square dancing at school and then dart ball. And my dad being off every other week on Fridays, he'd come in and show us how to play dart ball. So that was one of the things that we had to look forward to on Friday afternoons.
Now, for our younger audience, dart ball, is that like the darts that we have now?
Dart, but no, it's not. Dart ball, what you're playing now, bar darts, is overhand. This was underhand. And the teams got so good that we got to be, the team I was on, we got to be state champs. And I remember going to a tournament this undergrad. It's like baseball. You shoot for first base, second base, third base on a 4x4 board. And there's strikes and there's balls and there's double plays and a sacrifice, just like a regular baseball thing, but you're throwing darts from 20 feet. And I remember going to a tournament over in Two Rivers, and they kind of scoffed at us, what are these kids doing here? And the first inning of the first game, we blew them out with 13 runs. And the next year when the tournament was held, they didn't invite us back.
Okay.
And dart ball's still being played in Oshkosh, and it was played in the Lutheran churches. It was St. Vincent's had a good league. Sacred Heart had probably the biggest league.
What was kind of the school life, the culture when you were going to school, as opposed to maybe how it is today for kids?
It is. It's so different today. We were fortunate. We grew up, and like I said, I lived on the corner of 10th and Weisbrod, and I had a friend that lived on the corner of 10th in Kansas, and another one that was on 11th in Kansas, and the kids in between. So we're just always intermingling. So as they walked by, Jim Stutz lived on 11th, Steve Sitter lived on 10th block from me, and they'd come by our house on my way to school, so they'd pick me up. And one day, the three of us decided to take off, and the nun noticed that, gee, Stutz isn't there, and Sitter isn't there, and checked out, Spanbauer isn't there either. And so then the calls went home to our parents and said, what happened to those kids today?
So you went how long were you on Sacred Heart then?
Went right through 1st grade to 9th grade.
Okay.
And then at that time, Oshkosh High School was only a 3-year high school. So you had 10th, 11th, 12th grades at Oshkosh High, this current building here, at City Hall building, and graduated in 1960. But, not only your friends were from your school, you also went there at night. And the swings were out there. They had the playground. In the evening, you'd play baseball out there. You'd play football out there. The girls would come out there, and it was a gathering spot. You didn't need a building to go to, and you did it in the summer, and you did it in the winter. And when the street lights came on, you went home. And
so it really was kind of the center of social interaction. It was the center.
It was, and so it was not only the kids that I grew up with in my neighborhood, it was kids from other neighborhoods too that attended Sacred Heart. So it wasn't uncommon to have 40, 50 kids out there on the playground at night.
Wow.
So, describe to us a day in the life of Larry Spanbauer when he was a little scrapper, maybe in 5th grade or high school, or, But I know years ago, Larry, as you know, you had a lot of little grocery stores and you get candy or whatever else, and you got into some mischief. Did Larry ever get paddled for getting into some mischief?
Never got paddled, never got reprimanded, but we certainly had our fun. And growing on the outskirts of town, it was really a real advantage for us because we were a block away from the Chicago-Milwaukee Railroad. So the trains would come by and be loaded with sugar beets. So we'd go up there and we'd get a sugar beet and cut it up and found out that, boy, they don't taste very good. So we'd leave them alone. But even as you were younger, you had sand boxes. So you'd haul your wagon out to the tracks and there'd be a sand car out there that would leak and there'd be a pile of sand. So you'd help yourself and drag the sand back home. And, as you were younger, then you got a little bit older and you were allowed to travel a little bit farther. So we'd walk down to Jeske's store on 10th and Rubge and get some 2 cents worth of liver and some store string and go out to the lagoon with a pail and catch crabs all day. And at the end of the day, you'd let them go and build sailboats and sail them in the lagoon. In the middle of polio season, I know in 1955, 56, We'd swim in the lagoons to go get our sailboats when they tipped over, and that was something you shouldn't do because it was such a scare. Then you got older and you got to go out to the railroad tracks and ride the putt-putts and the maintenance vehicle out to the first crossroads and swim in the quarry and play in the woods and play on the stone piles from Lutz's quarry. So there was no shortage of things for us to do, and it was it was a real advantage for us kids to be able to do it. And our parents just let us play, and you didn't think of creating mischief because you weren't about to get in any trouble. You know. There was no way that you would want to do something that your parents would get reprimanded for.
Because you had ultimate respect for your parents.
Absolutely, right. And that was it. Your name was your what you were good for, and so you were a Spanbauer, you were whomever, and it was just you weren't going against that.
No.
Everyone knew my dad, so it's just, that was the other thing, and that's not uncommon. The whole South Side knew everybody, so you just didn't, and the neighbors looked out for you, and then. So you wouldn't do anything in your neighborhood.
Well, I'm a little bit younger than you, but I still remember, Larry, that when your mom and dad told you to do something, you had the fear of God that if you didn't do it, there were going to be repercussions. And would you concur with that back in the 50s? It was the same way?
Well, sure, because especially like now in the winter with the snow, it was go out and shovel the sidewalk before your dad gets home.
Yeah.
And so he doesn't have to do it. And my grandmother lived across the street from us, so I'd shovel her walk. And then there was a gentleman next door to us across the street, Mr. Scheinflug, and old German, and spoke broken English. And so I'd help shovel his sidewalk. And then in the summer, it was always, hey, Spanbauer, he'd say, hey, Spanbauer, come over here. And what are you doing today? I said, we're going out the tracks. He said, come here. And go in his garage. And he had a gross box of cherry bombs or M80s or something. You got some matches? Yeah, we got some matches. Okay. Just don't blow your fingers off.
Right.
So then a week later, all of a sudden, be walking out through the backyard again to walk out the tracks. Spanbauer, come over here.
Yeah.
He didn't like the neighbors, and he had grapes all around his garden and broken glass underneath him, so you couldn't go under the fence to go raid his garden or whatever else. And we never did. We left him alone. But he didn't like the neighbors, but he had an attachment to me. So
all right.
He was a good old neighbor.
Well, with that, Larry, we're going to take a little bit of break here. Having fun talking to Larry Spanbauer, lifetime resident of Oshkosh, former council member. Derek and I have a bunch of questions left for Larry, and Larry's got some things that he'd like to show later on in the show. So with that, stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment.
Inches beneath the surface, utility lines are carrying electricity, gas, and more to your home. Digger's Hotline helps avoid costly or dangerous mistakes. It doesn't matter how deep you're digging. Call 811 or click diggershotline.com 3 working days before you start your project, and we'll help take the risk out of digging. Protect your simple pleasures. Know what's below.
There is a place where history is captured in time, where the voices of past generations still discuss the days of success, of love, hope, and joy. Timeless, playful,
welcome to my attic.
Memorable. The Oshkosh Public Museum. Come for the sights, stay for the memories.
Welcome back to Oshkosh Diaries, talking with Larry Spanbauer about the life and times of Larry Spanbauer. We have a bunch more questions, and as I stated before, Larry's got some items that he'd like to show. So, Derek, you got the next question.
Yeah, before break, we were talking about some of the things you did as a kid, and a little bit younger, but nonetheless, even some of the things I remember as a kid are long gone, and certainly the things you talked about. almost seem like a bygone era. We see these photos of Oshkosh downtown in the 50s and 60s and all the lights. And how do you remember Oshkosh back then, particularly the downtown?
Well, being from the south side, we didn't cross the bridge. You know, you hear the story always. If you were on the north side, you didn't come to the south side, and if you were south side, you didn't go to the north
And
side.
that was true,
And
was it not?
it's very true. And so, other than going to the theaters once in a while, the Oshkosh at a time, or the Ralph, the Strand, with Elbow Queen labels, someone in the neighborhood would have a bunch of 25 Elbow Queen labels, and so we could go to a free movie. You know, we had our own Main Street, which was Ohio Street, really. The Neagles owned the whole block between 9th and 8th Street, so you had a drugstore there, you had Punky Neagle's Tavern, you had a bakery shop, there was a beauty shop, I got my hair cut in a barber shop, and then Sunlights had a ice cream shop on the corner of 8th and 8th and Ohio. And so there was a general merchandise store down there too on 8th Street, the brick building that's on the northeast corner. But if it wasn't there, we'd walk down to Oregon Street, and you had the Banner store, and you had a Hirschberg store down there. So there were a number of different stores that you could go and get everything you needed on Oregon Street. So there was no need to cross the river. So as a kid, I didn't see a whole lot of the north side.
It's funny you mentioned that, because you know, I've heard that you do hear that when you cross that bridge, you were kind of taking your life into your own hands there. I mean, is it myth, or is there some truth to that?
I think it was just kind of a natural barrier, and because, you know, you did everything by foot or your bicycle. And really, there was no reason to go over there in the streets. You weren't familiar with the streets, so why would you go over there and get lost?
Was there an age where that kind of faded out, Larry? I mean, if you were a kid, you know, you have those north-south thing, but if you're 30 years old, I mean, you didn't fear going across the river then, did you? Or
No. By the time you got to high school, because you had to cross the bridge, you had to cross the river to get to high school. And then you met up with other kids that were in your classes and things. You were involved with sports or involved in something else. And so you started developing a different set of friends or additional friends. And so the barrier broke down when you got in high school. And so you'd have to walk to the athletic field for the football games on Jackson, and you'd go to the basketball games in the old rec gym, and then walk home. And usually after we'd leave the Friday night dances, you know, after the games at 11:30, and walk down to Punky Neagle's, walk home and stop at Punky Neagle's, because we knew they had their kitchen was open till 12:30, and you can order a fish and French fries and a soda for 25 cents. And so that was always a thing on Friday nights. And after that, Justin Nick's Pizza on Main Street when you got to be seniors, and that was the hangout. 1959, 1960, somewhere in that era for me. And so Justin Nick's, and then the pizza parlor on Oregon Street was another one. And you know, you'd sit in there and you'd have a pizza, and someone would come in and they'd take a piece off your platter, and you didn't think anything of it. It was a high school jock or whatever else. And I know on the pizza parlor on Oregon Street, the police officer that walked the beat, it wasn't uncommon for him to come and walk in there and look around and take a piece of pizza off your platter, and so it's just the way it was. He knew us, we knew him, and so it was just a friendly environment.
So if you compare and contrast Oshkosh from then to now, what's the one thing that you would say sticks out like a sore thumb from your memory to now?
I think it's that it's that everybody knew each other, and it was non-confrontational. As much as you say North Side was against the South Side, and you know, you didn't dare go across because there'd be a fight. It wasn't really that way. It was just non-confrontational. You see the pictures of Friday night on Main Street, the people standing. You see the parades, pictures of the parades that took place. They were 10 deep on the street. And what's nice to see now, the 4th of July parade or the holiday parade, there's a lot of people that attend those, and you don't realize it until you're in them. Like, you've had the opportunity to be in the parades, and I've been a part of some of those parades, being on the council, and you really get an eyeful as to how many people come out and enjoy the parades that we have in town.
Okay.
So that hasn't changed a bit, and I think that's one of the nice things.
Derek?
Switching gears a little bit, when you were old enough, what types of jobs did you obtain as you progressed through your high school years into adulthood?
Yeah, I started out working at a farm market picking strawberries, and that lasted about an hour. And I think I got a couple cents a quart to pick them. And I walked off, and I remember one of my friends that we'd all done it, they stuck it out. And he gave me an envelope that had 10 cents in it. That's what I had made.
Oh.
So that didn't last long. I got a paper route when I was old enough at 12 and did a journal route. And so I had 80 customers, went down 11th Street to Ohio Street and came back up 10th Street back to my house, and then back around through where Harnick's is and down 9th Street till just about the Split Level Tavern. So I had that till I was about 15, and then I worked for Connie Poffenroff's Meat Market on 17th and Ohio, and go in on Thursday night and do boning. After they slaughtered a cow and that, they'd have boxes of bones and that stuff with meat on them yet that they would make bologna out of and wieners out of. And so my job on Thursday night and Friday night was to do that. And then Friday, when I got old enough to, or on Saturdays, and after I got old enough to have a driver's license, I could deliver groceries and then clean out the cooler and put new sawdust down on the cooler floor. And so that was a great experience, seeing how that works. And then Cliff Sabora hired me at Sabora Piggly Wiggly. And so then you get another group of friends, Jordy Youngworth, Dick Kempinger, Dick Searles, and Bob Pollock. And so we chummed around then through high school and after high school. Started college in '60 after I graduated from high school. Continued working at the Pig. Got married in '63. Got employed with Rockwell in '64. Worked there until '99. So I spent 36 years at Rockwell. And so I was off for about 4 weeks, retirement for 4 weeks, and my daughter was at our house, and she said, "Hey, Dad, here's a job for you." And Bemis had an ad for a documentation coordinator. And what I had done at Rockwell, I drove forklift truck for 30 years. So I was part of the union. I was union secretary for 6 years. And but when they went into a redesign process to save jobs and try to take costs out, they needed a union person. I was the most senior person. I had 30 years at that time when that job came up. So I bid the job and was awarded it, and co-worked with Patty Kimball. She was the management person, and so we put the team together, and we worked together for about 5 years. And so the situation arose that I sent a resume to Bemis saying, how employable am I after driving a forklift truck for so many years? And about 3 days later, they called me and said, "We'd like to talk to you." And so I told my boss, that the person that hired me, that I was only there for one winter. They always said the first winter of retirement is the hardest one, the adjustment. I spent 14 winters there. So I finally retired last year. I'm just about retired a year now. So it was an 8 to 12 job, working with engineers, setting up a documentation program for the quality system. It was a fun job. Enjoyed it, and then it just started to get a little bit more and a little bit more, so it's just time to move on.
So Larry, as you were growing up, obviously you respected your parents. Is there another person that, or maybe people that you really admired, you really thought were heroes, or that you took a liking to when you were growing up?
I don't think I had any heroes. You're involved with us being a sports family, where you know who the football players were, all the baseball players were, the basketball players, but there wasn't anybody that I guess I would really consider that I had a hero. My dad was, because everybody knew him.
Yeah.
And even after I was on a council, when I ran for the council, it was like, 30 years after he died. "Oh, you're Barney Spanbauer's kid." And I hope it's maybe a pipe dream that 50 years after I die, someone will say to one of my grandkids, "Oh, you were Larry Spanbauer's granddaughter?" It isn't going to happen, but it happened all the time, and it's just, and maybe, with your dad too, being in a fire force, and he was well known.
Yeah.
And they make the connection.
Yeah.
It's just, so it's that kind of just, I guess, really makes you feel warm inside.
Right.
That your family name and your family was that much. So if you're looking at a hero, I guess the family name, that would be the heroes.
Okay.
Yeah. Absolutely true. Very great answer with that. Now, you mentioned the Oshkosh Common Council, and you served on that from, 1993 to 99? So what inspired you to get into that? How did you get involved with that? What was the motivator?
Yeah, I had no intentions of ever doing something like that, as probably most candidates did follow the same line. But 2 years before that, 1991, I'm Catholic, my wife's Methodist, and she belonged to Algoma Methodist Church. And Jim Chitwood was a member of that church too. And we had a young couples group, and he was one of them that was in the group along with other people in town, Jim Bransel, who was a teacher at Lourdes. And when Jim Chitwood decided to run for school board, he stopped over one night and said, I need to have you on my committee. And someone says, if you need somebody, you need the Spanbauer name. You need a connection with a Spanbauer name. And so, okay, I said, I'll be your treasurer. So I was, and we got him elected. He and Dennis McHugh, were the 1-2 candidates at that time. Dennis came in first, and Jim Chitwood, completely unknown, came in second. So 2 years later, we're in church, and he's sitting behind me, and he taps me on the shoulder, and he said, it's time for you to run for council. And there were some openings at that time, and I think there were 3 openings that year. And so I thought about it, and I said, well, you want to be my chairman? And he said, sure, he would. And Sue Winniehoff was a member of the church, too. And I said, well, how about you being co-chairs? And so that's what happened. Jim Chitwood and Sue Winniehoff became my co-chairs. And Spanbauer name, South Side, working in a union environment.
Dad?
Yeah, everybody knew Barney Spanbauer. It just all fell into place, and then Lynn Webster got on board. Of all people, Mrs. Oshkosh. She knew everybody, and she contacted me and said, Jim Chitwood said that you're going to run for city council. Can we have a discussion? And so she brought in that whole other element, the north of the river element. And so in 1993, I ended up with over 5,000 votes, which I don't think there's been 5,000 votes for a candidate since.
Yeah.
And so a completely unknown walked in there, and I won by second place over like 600, 800 votes. It was just a really real runaway. 2 years later, I ran, came in second, I think, to Mrs. Bleckel. Third year, I took out my papers. January, turned them in. 18th of January, I had a heart attack, and so made front page. All the news broadcasts on WOSH. After everything was over with, I won then again. I was top vote getter again. And everybody joked that it was a $140,000 campaign. That's what my hospital bill was. They said it was unfair. So, but they got even with me 2 years later. I came in fifth.
Yeah.
And so didn't make it. So, which was really one of the great things, because I didn't return to the council in '99, and I retired 2 months later, and I could tell in my walk, my gait was different. My heart surgeon had asked, do you have any stress in your life? I don't have any stress. But when those two things were gone, I was a different person. So those people that do serve the city on the council and that, it's something to think about. There is a stress. There is a stress factor that goes along with it.
Sure there is. Okay, well, since the times you've been off the council and you're, I guess, fully retired now, Larry, what do you do to keep busy? What kind of activities you undertaking?
Well, when I left the council, I didn't stop doing things, and in '95, even while I was on the council, we built Carl Traeger School and did a referendum, and that worked out. We had the firehouse relocations. I was chaired the East Side Firehouse Relocation Committee. I was a member of the Lakeshore Committee when we redid the golf course. I served on the Police and Fire Commission '99 till 2004. The Sesquicentennial came up in 2003, and I attended a meeting, and they said, "Why don't you chair it?" And I said, "You people have done all the groundwork." I said, "I'm not going to chair it." And Arlene Schmuel was kind of taking the leadership, and I said, "I'll co-chair, I'll help." And so they jumped on that. They dragged me into that. And so Arlene Schmuel and myself were co-chairs for the sesquicentennial celebration. And then in that year, 2003, we started the Antique Appraisal Show, Antique Road Show, which I can say one more time, which is always a funny story. That we thought watching the Antique Road Show on public television that it would be a great thing for us to do for a sesquicentennial celebration. So we did it, and on a Friday, the Northwestern ran an article saying, part of that is going to be a show at the Senior Center, do appraisals of Oshkosh memorabilia, and we had called it the Oshkosh Antique Roadshow. On Monday, I had been at work, and my wife got a phone call and said that he'd be home at 12:30. Well, at 12:30 the phone rang. It wasn't 12:29, it wasn't 12:31, it was 12:30, and it was the attorney for the roadshow out of Boston. And they said they read the article the Northwestern had done that we were using a copyrighted name. And I said, I take full responsibility, I'm sorry. And they were very nice about it and said, just cease and desist, and it happens all the time, and we just want to create the awareness and that you stop. So now it's called, and we've done it, and the 12th annual one is coming up. So now it's the Oshkosh Antique Appraisal Show. So we have the terminology correct. And so.
Okay.
Before we switch gears and get into some of the books you've written and maybe some of the other things you'd like to share, before we get to that, would you care to mention anything about your family, wife, kids, what they do?
Yeah, I've been married we celebrated our 50th wedding anniversary last February. And Carolyn, she's a former Carol Ames. Her dad ran Guernsey Dairy. And so after her dad passed away in 94, we were in an antique store and saw the Guernsey Dairy bottle, and I thought, geez, we should collect some of those. Her dad didn't save anything. So we started collecting. So now my little bar area in the family room downstairs in the lower level is now a milk bar. We have 30-some different bottles. So that's her collection. And I have a daughter who's 50, works at the Sheriff's Department. My son is a jeweler in town here. And then 10 years later, we had a tail ender, and he's attorney in Chicago. So I have a granddaughter who's 22, and have two other granddaughters that are 6, 7, and 5. They just turned 7 and 5. So we try and make a trip down to Chicago every 6 weeks or 2 months and spend some time with them. And they come up, and living in Chicago is completely different. And they live in Lincoln Park, and there's a park across the street, but there's no grass, and there's no garages, and there's it's strictly Chicago-ish. And, so they come up and they like to take their shoes off and run in the grass, and take them to the parks here, the great parks. They have a great park system in Chicago too, but ours are completely different. Last summer we rode the train and did the merry-go-round out at Menominee Park, and so it was a whole different
Always
experience
good for them to
them.
come back home.
Yeah, it's
I'm
fun
sure.
for them to come home. They like
absolutely.
coming here and
Right.
put up the tent in the backyard, put up the swimming pool, and just, do things that they can't do in Chicago. It's just a confined area. So.
Okay. Anything more to add on the family, or is that?
No, it's family's been good. We've all been healthy, so it's life's been good. It's been very good.
Okay.
I mentioned earlier I had a heart attack in '97, and things keep pumping along, and so you wake up every morning and you're just grateful that you're still above ground, and that you can be helpful to the kids. I went down to Chicago last weekend, or a couple of weeks ago. We were down there for Grandparents' Day. Both grandkids go to a private school down there. But so they have Grandparents' Day, and all the grandparents come, and it's just a big deal. They put on a presentation, and it's quite a remarkable school, Francis Parker School. But then the first grade teacher, Madeline's teacher, asked, they were doing a thing with grandparents talking to the class, doing an experience. And the teacher is from De Pere, Wisconsin. So, wanted to know what I did and what my hobbies were in that. And I said I was a coin collector and collected counterfeit coins and wrote a couple books on counterfeit coins. And he said, well, that would be a great subject, So every week they were having another teacher. So about a month ago I was down there and I gave my talk and the kids all said that, 'cause we talked about counterfeits and they want to know about making counterfeit coins and how you made them. But what the thing they did get out of the presentation was, if you're going to make a counterfeit coin, you're going to go to jail. And so they sent me the video of it on my iPad so I could watch how it went and how they interacted with it. But I thought I had done a real nice job. And they keep me in touch with the other grandparents that are coming down there.
Right.
The gentleman that followed me was the attorney for Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh.
And a federal judge, and talked about equality and civil rights and that stuff, and came to class with his robe on, and and talked about one week they have a forklift operator, and the next week you have a federal judge.
So you're talking about counterfeit coins, and then you get a judge in there.
That's right. So
Okay. Well, with that, we're gonna take another break. Great conversation with Larry Spanbauer. Stay tuned. When we come back, Larry's got some things that he'd like to show us. So we'll be back in a minute.
On the surface, the simple pleasures in life are going on all around us. But inches beneath the surface, utility lines are carrying electricity, gas, and more to your home. Digger's Hotline helps avoid costly or dangerous mistakes. It doesn't matter how deep you're digging. Call 811 or click diggershotline.com 3 working days before you start your project, and we'll help take the risk out of digging. Protect your simple pleasures. Know what's below.
There is a place where history is captured in time, where the voices of past generations still discuss the days of success, of love, hope, and joy. Timeless, playful,
Welcome to my attic.
memorable. The Oshkosh Public Museum. Come for the sights, stay for the memories.
Welcome back to Oshkosh Diaries, talking to Larry Spanbauer. Larry's got quite a few things he wants to show us, but Derek and I have just a couple quick questions for him, and then Larry, we're going to get to your items. Larry, as we alluded to before, we're all members of the Oshkosh Memorabilia Club. Why are you a member of the Oshkosh Memorabilia Club?
The Memorabilia Club is really an interesting group of people. We all collect and have an interest in preserving Oshkosh items. And when I retired in '99, I thought, well, I'm going to start collecting Oshkosh things, and I did. And then very quickly realized that you can't collect everything that Oshkosh has saved. Unlike some areas, that were really throwaway societies or throwaway neighborhoods, this city saved everything. And the more you get into it, the more you find that. So it was joining a group of people with like interests. We have probably a 10-minute business meeting, and then everyone brings things every month to pass around the table and to share stories. And so it's a real advantage if you're a collector to belong to a group like this. And we look out for each other, and that's the other nice thing. Like I said, you can't collect everything, so I specialize in Oshkosh tavern tokens, and that's where my pursuit was. Paul is into Oshkosh beer memorabilia, and Jim Stutz is into milk bottles, and so Dan Schneider collects silver spoons, and we put on this antique appraisal show every year. And again, this year on the last Saturday of March 29th, we'll have 30 tables of Oshkosh memorabilia items sitting out there. And then you realize people are digging deeper and bringing different things out. And so it's just, you're just always amazed, and then you're also amazed at what people bring in. And they may not want to sell it, they just want to show you, or they may want to give it to you. And the other part of it is, giving back. Like I said, we've been a throwaway society for so many years, and we skipped the whole generation, and now this generation that's out there, this 40-year-old generation, is looking back at their ancestries too, and their parents and their grandparents. And I had an opportunity. Someone dropped off a Cease Hall hat. It was a clothing store on Oregon Street, and I don't know if it was when I was on the council or I went to the council meeting to promote the show, and I said I had this hat from Cease Hall, and if there's someone that's connected with Mr. Hall, I have a hat and a hat box. Well, the show was open for about 10 minutes, and there was a young lady that was came up to me and said, Mr. Hall was my dad, and I forget what his first name was, but you said you had a hat, and I said, yeah, and I showed her I had the hat in the box. She said, my dad always wore a hat, and he said, even when we took out the garbage, he put a hat on and took the garbage out, and like my father-in-law, didn't save anything, so it was a way of giving back, and here, take it with you. And we've done that with other things. Fenzel clothing store that was on Oregon Street also, I had a whole display on Fenzel clothing store, bank books and everything else that I had acquired somewhere. And she came up and said, my grandfather was Mr. Fenzel, and took everything out of the display case and gave it to her and said,
Right.
keep this in your archives, it belongs with your family. And those are things that we all do. And so we add to our collections, and we give back to where things belong also, and that's the fun part of the organization.
And I certainly recall some stories from some of our meetings, things halfway across the United States finding their way back to Oshkosh and finding their way back to where they belong, and it's remarkable.
Paul just set up a web page for us called, and maybe you
OshkoshCollectibles.com.
And about 3 weeks ago, I got an email from a gentleman saying, I stumbled onto, I looked up your website, and I saw your Civil War token on there from Hay and Clark. He said, I have one just like it, but it doesn't have a date on it. Mine's dated 1863. And so I emailed him back and said that Hay and Clark had 3 different varieties, one with a date, one without a date, and then the one that was made out of a different metal. And he said, I'll send it to you. And I said, well, I'll make it right with you, whatever. He said, no. He said, it needs to go back to Oshkosh. He said, it doesn't mean anything to me. And I said, well, did your family have any connection with Oshkosh? He said, no, my dad ran a grocery store in upstate New York.
Wow.
And when I was cleaning out his desk, he had all these things that came across the counter from the grocery store, and this was in with it.
Right.
Wow.
And so it's come back to Oshkosh and, sitting out in New York, upstate New York.
All right. Well, Larry, why don't you get your first thing ready here? I do want to mention on a previous show, Larry actually told me about this. He watched the show, and I said that the Antique Appraisal Show was the first Saturday in April, and I got scolded for that at the meeting. It is not the first Saturday in April. It is the last Saturday in March, and that is over at the Senior Center, the Annex, which is the north building, and that is from 9 till 2 o'clock, isn't it right, Larry?
Yes.
Yeah, 9 o'clock till 2 o'clock. So, as always, come on over there, bring what you got. We can give you an appraisal and tell us a story or two, and I'd love to see you there. So with that, Larry, why don't you pull out something and show us what you got, and we've got about 14 minutes yet. So.
Okay. When I graduated from high school, I started college here in Oshkosh, and I was a history major, geography minor, so I always had an interest in that sort of thing. I collected stamps as a kid. I collected coins as a kid. And all of a sudden I started collecting counterfeits in the coin collection, that they would show up. And so, like any other collection, you end up with 4 or 5 of them, and you end up with 10 of them, and that collection grew to be 600 different counterfeit coins, all different denominations. And there was always a concern because they were illegal to own. There was always a concern that the Secret Service or Treasury Department would knock on the door and do whatever. So the collection ended up is in the American Numismatic Association in Colorado Springs. It was donated there. But so out of those counterfeits, I put a book together in 1975 and called Colonial Copies, Private Mint Replicas and Modern Counterfeits. And because of that, I won a scholarship to Colorado College, the American Numismatic Association, to do counterfeit detection out there and see what they had. Numismatists of Wisconsin paid for the scholarship, so I went out to Colorado Springs. Well, while I was there, I was talking to a gentleman and a dealer, and he said, "Are you going to apply for the U.S. Assay Commission?" And I said, "What's that?" So he told me about what the Assay Commission was. It was the oldest running commission in the United States. It started back in 1889, I believe, 1789, and it had run continuously through. A gentleman in the 1860s from Oshkosh was put on, and H.O. Granberg, who was had mines out in Colorado, was a member in both 1916 and 1917. So I thought, well, what do you have to do? So I had to write a letter to my congressman, who at that time was Bill Steiger. So I wrote a letter to Bill Steiger, asked that I'd be considered for the United States Assay Commission, which happened to be the bicentennial celebration, 1976. I had to get letters from Senator Proxmire, the governor, and this stuff all got forwarded then to the director of the Mint, who was Mary Brooks. And it's out of what I found out later in a letter from Mrs. Brooks, that there were 2,400 applicants that applied for this commission, and 104 names were forwarded to President Gerald Ford. And out of those 104, they picked 27. I was one of the 27.
Wow.
Again, here comes a forklift operator from Oshkosh going on with federal judges, Harvey Stacks, who had the largest coin firm in the country, multimillionaires, most of them were. And then myself and a fellow who was a house sitter from Illinois. And that's what he did. He was a professional house sitter. When people went away on weekends and for the winters, he just went in and moved into their house. So,
Wow.
So out of the 2,700, out of the 2,400, then I was one of the 27 that was selected. Went to Philadelphia, and we took over the Mint for 2 days and did what was called a trial of the picks. And one of the things that we had to pay our own airfare. They paid for the hotel and paid for the food, but we had to pay our own airfare to go out there. And it turned out to be that it was the last year, and hopefully you can get a picture of this.
Number one?
It was a medal that was given as being a member. So there's only 27 for the members, and then one in the Smithsonian Institute, and a couple of others, the American Numismatic Association. So it's
There you go.
the government really did a nice job on that, Washington crossing the Delaware.
And what is this commission, Larry? What do they do? What
They,
would they-
they weigh coins, they count coins, and you check over the bookwork. It's mostly ceremonial now, or it was ceremonial. In the early days, they actually did weigh the coins and that. When I was there in Philadelphia, they were striking the bicentennial coinage, the bicentennial quarter and half dollar and dollar. And so when you went into the Mint, you checked everything into a safety deposit box, and there was a guard there about the size of Rosie Greer, I always say. And so you went through, and they told you, don't pick anything up off the floor. That there's coins laying on the floor, there's boxes where they throw things in, and you have huge bins of coins that you can imagine what it takes to produce the amount of coins that the U.S. uses every year. And as I was walking out, you went through the metal detector again. Walking out, the metal detector went off. And this guard, like I say, the size of Rosie Greer, just said, "You stand over here."
We
And I
need
said,
to talk
"Yes,
to you, sir."
Yes, sir. And he went through, got down to my shoes. I'm wearing safety shoes. Safety shoes set off. He said, "You wearing safety shoes?" Yes, I am. He said, "Get out of here." So it was one of those neat experiences. A sideline to that was, I found out later that Mary Brooks, who was director of the Mint, was a godchild to Bill Steiger's son.
Wow, jeez.
So you surmise that Bill Steiger gets the letter, say, "Hey, Mary, someone from my district.
Right.
How else would you make something
Right.
like that?" There must have been something that went on. So,
Right.
How long did that appointment last then? To that?
The 3 days I was in
Just the 3
Philadelphia.
days. Okay, but what an experience. I mean,
Yeah.
And, and that was the last one then. When President Jimmy Carter came in 77, he decided that the $250,000 that was being spent to make that happen was a waste of money and cut it out. They had struck a medal for it, and it never got issued to anybody. And then they released them, a couple hundred of them, through the Mint sales. And I have a copy of that one too.
Okay, we got a few minutes yet,
So-
Larry. Why don't you grab something next?
Okay. Like I said earlier, my main interest in collecting was tavern tokens And a year and a half ago, I did a book, which is currently out of print. It's called Oshkosh Taverns, Oshkosh Neighborhood Taverns, and the people who ran them, which was really a fun venture. A couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, I should say, the Tavern League was in town, and they asked if I would give a tour of some of the taverns. We got a school bus. It was 100 degrees that day. We stopped started out at the new convention center and hotel, went to Oblio's on Main Street. They had a drink there. Went to Trails End, had one of their famous hot dogs and a beer. Went to Jerry's on CP Street, ended up at the AC Doocy, and they were just delighted to do that. And hopefully we're going to do some more of that. So out of that, because it was so much fun doing it, I thought, well, what could I do next? I gathered all the information for the taverns, but when I did it, I also gathered information on the cigar industry. And so I'm in the process of putting together, again, another book called The Oshkosh Cigar Industry. And I'm currently looking for cigar boxes from Oshkosh, and it's amazing how many of those are showing up. Boxes from the Athearn Hotel, Chief Oshkosh brand cigars. Found out there's one from the Ralph Hotel. The Eagles Club had their own brand. I would think the Masonic Lodge and maybe the Odd Fellows also did. So this is what we're going after now. And I said earlier, with one of the things that happens in the club, that we share things and we go back and forth. Some of the cigar boxes that I've been able to acquire have been from club members, and so is this ribbon. The museum has a copy of this one. If you go online, you see it. I also have one now. It's from Local 168 of the International Cigar Makers Unions. It's from 1880. They organized. Mr. Gabe Roth was instrumental in that, had a cigar business in town. And there were probably at least 50 different manufacturers, and some of the businesses I'm finding out rolled, they only had 6 employees, 8 employees. The buildings were only 10 feet, 12 feet wide, 30, 40 feet long, the old buildings on Main Street. But they sold 350, 450,000 cigars a year.
Wow.
So the business was an incredible business, and there's 50 of these in town. So if it wasn't a grocery store and it wasn't a tavern, it was a cigar business. And I didn't realize that until I started getting into this information. So any help that I can get from the people out in the community, I'd appreciate. Just if they want to sell it, I'd be willing to purchase it, or just take a picture of it and add it to the book. I've got about 100 pages put together. And so as you find one more item, you start adding more pages and you find out more history about it. I'll end with, I was looking at going through different information on the cigar industry, and they showed a box that had an NRA in it. I thought, well, National Rifle Association, that early? 1934 was written on the back of the box. And so I went and looked up the NRA, and it's sure enough, they were 1871. But as I pursued it, it was the National Recovery Act. After the Depression in 1929, when things started getting going under Franklin Roosevelt in 1933, there was a National Recovery Act, and it had a blue eagle on that as their insignia and an NRA over the top of it. And so I have one of the cigar boxes from H. Dirksen and Company that bought into that and has that on one of their boxes. So now it's a matter of finding how many other people had boxes that have that same insignia on it. And they're quite rare. I found that it was only in the Supreme Court ruled that it was illegal for them to do that, for the federal government to set up a plan like that. And don't have enough of the information yet. Like I say, I just stumbled onto it, so it's something else to learn. But they did say that those the boxes with the blue eagle on them, the NRA, are extremely scarce. So it'll be interesting to see what shows up. And again, bring it to our antique appraisal show, and we'll help you through this.
So if you're anyone in Oshkosh, you had a cigar in your mouth, I guess, years ago, huh?
If you look at the old pictures, you see the business people. The cigar makers, actually, they were a skilled workforce. and they actually wore suits to work.
Oh, wow.
Well, when they left home, they would walk to work and they'd have suits and they'd have their hat, their derby, their haberdasher on. And when they got to work, they'd put on their apron and change clothes. And when they left work, they would go. But the average person, they said, throughout the United States, smoked approximately 252 cigars a year. So it's basically a cigar a day. And so you can see where the numbers came from. And the two that I quoted, the 350,000 and 450,000, they weren't the major ones in town. So I can only imagine what Dirksen must have done, because he had 20, 30, 40 employees. He was one of the big dealers. So.
Well, all right. Well, with that, Larry, thank you for joining us on behalf of myself and Derek.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us today, and thank you for watching, and tune in next time for another episode of Oshkosh Diaries. Good night.